Well, hey, we hope that all of you will take part in Refinery Academy. Now, I don't know of another church that does something like this. There probably are churches, but I don't personally know of any where they will actually give you an opportunity to dive so much deeper into biblical studies or theological training. So if you've ever wanted to know more or have a better understanding of all things biblical or theological, Refinery Academy is for you. We can't wait to release this fall. Well, hey, today we continue our series, When We Hurt, and my name is David. I'm one of the pastors here, and if we could just take a moment and just greet those that are watching online. Can we do that? So glad that you're here, and if you are watching online, we just want to say thank you for joining us because maybe you're watching from home or maybe you're watching on your phone. Maybe you're from Refinery and you're out and about somewhere this weekend. We're just so glad, no matter what, that you're here joining us with Refinery Online. So, hey, today as we continue this series, When We Hurt, I got to tell you, it's interesting. Anytime you have an opportunity to speak at Refinery Christian Church, you genuinely do not know all the stuff that's going on in people's lives and what they bring. I have no idea all the stuff that you've brought here today. For some of us, maybe we might say that actually, things are actually going pretty good. If someone were to ask you how things are going, you might say, maybe for the first time in a long time, things are actually going okay. But for some of us, there might be some of us that are facing some tragedy right now, whether it be some health issues, bad news in the family, job-related issues, you name it. But some of us in here may be facing some pretty serious stuff. And I know that this series, When We Hurt, has been impacting many of you. I've heard that from many of you. And so I would say, if you were to think about the most stressful time in your life, it probably had something to do with one of these 5 things. One would be a regional or global event like a pandemic, a war, or natural disaster. Anybody been impacted by a pandemic recently? Yeah, every single one of us. Another one would be the death of a loved one. That can impact us, cause a lot of stress. A sudden move can also do that, or a career or job change. Anybody move here recently for a job situation, all right? Or just moved here recently. Welcome to Arizona. Appreciate you guys being here. Another could be a painful relationship with a family member, just things, whether it be a kid or mom or dad or a brother, sister, or extended family, something has just caused some tension. Listen, all those things are kind of in the top list of things that can cause stress. And the story we're going to cover today, all the main characters are dealing with these exact things. And I think about the world we're in, the news that we keep seeing every day, and the onslaught of just stuff, whether it be the pandemic or the loss of loved ones or the changing of jobs or whatever it might be. This daily grind that we experience, this drudgery of life can really kind of deduce us down to where if we just kind of reach the base of who we are, right? Just not being spiritual at all, but where we're just kind of sick of everything, this might be the mantra that we're kind of having in our head. Look, I just want to do what I want, when I want, with whomever I want, and then we add the little phrase so it goes down better, as long as no one gets hurt, right? I just want to do what I want, when I want, with whomever I want, as long as no one gets hurt. And this is actually a great starting point for our text today because we're going to be in the book of Ruth. And what a great story the book of Ruth is for a series called When We Hurt, because we will find here at the beginning of our story that there is so much hurt and despair with them. And although we may not think of it this way, we may not think of the book of Ruth this way, we need to see it within the same eye or the same time period as the book of Judges. Now, you may not be as familiar with the book of Judges. That's one of those books that we might skip as we're reading the Bible. It's like, book of Judges, what? And we skip. It's like a little bit easier to read Philippians or, a gospel or something like that. But the book of Judges is important because when we look at Ruth, we need to see it through the mindset or through the filter, the interpretive lens of Judges, because this was written and happened historically in the same time period. And the people of Israel were giving that mantra. That is how they lived for 300 years. For 300 years in this time period, their mantra was, I just want to do what I want, when I want, with whomever I want. Now, they didn't put in that as long as no one gets hurt. In the Old Testament, people get hurt a lot, right? So they didn't add that, but that was the mantra of the people of Israel at this time, a period of about 300 years. And Ruth's story is at the end of that. And it's really important for us to understand that there's a pattern. There's this cyclical pattern that keeps happening in the book of Judges at this time period for the people of Israel, and it's called the cycle of Judges. And here's what it is. This is what would happen. Number one, Israel would abandon God. Then Israel would endure some kind of oppression, and then Israel would cry out to God, and then God would send a judge to deliver them, and then the whole cycle would repeat. It's kind of like if you're a parent and you tell your kids, don't do this, and then what do? They go and do it, and then they get in trouble, right? They get busted. Either they get in trouble at school or they get in trouble with the law, and like, can you please bail me out? Can you please, I'll never do it again, right? And so you go in, you make everything better and everything right, and then what ends up happening? The same kind of process begins happening. That's kind of what was happening. It wasn't kind of. That is what was happening with God and his people. And this pattern went on for 300 years because the people of God abandoned God. And what was happening is God had made a promise to Israel. He made a promise to his people through Moses and the prophets. And he said, I want to redeem the world through you. I'm going to do a great work through you, the people of Israel. I want you to be extraordinary. But the people of Israel, they didn't want anything to do with that. They wanted to be like everyone else. And so instead of looking vertical into the things of God, they began to look at what everyone else was doing, and they wanted to be like everyone else until their circumstances made them cry out to God. Now, some of this kind of makes sense. If we were to just look at it historically, they were once a people who were enslaved in Egypt. They did not raise their own crops. They did not do those things. Even during the 40 years when they were wandering, God provided manna from heaven, and quail would come down, birds would come down, so they ate what they gathered. But when they go to this promised land, now they have to become farmers, and so they go and they talk to the people that are living there, like, how do you raise crops? You know what those people said? You've got to worship these gods. You've got to do the things that we do so that you can have a good crop. And so the people of Israel, they began to kind of lose sight of their history and who they were as a people. And they began to want to be like everyone else. And so if you were to sum up this period, this 300 years of which we come to the story of Ruth, you find the best kind of like summation of that at the end of Judges. It's in Judges 21, verse 25, and it says this. It says, in those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And so we see this destructive pattern that's happening. And all the while this is happening, God's saying, I'm going to use you, people of Israel, whether you like it or not, kicking or screaming, whether you work with me or against me, I am going to do this. And I love what Andy Stanley says in kind of about all this. He's like, in the midst of all this that was happening, with the book of Ruth, we find that God was decorating for Christmas. God was decorating for Christmas. It's almost like, really, this is like a Christmas story in a way. And I know some of you weirdos are actually listening to Christmas music already, right? Some of you are. I know it. Some of you, like, you listen to it year-round. Some of you may have a Christmas tree up year-round. Is that anyone in this room? You're psycho about Christmas. We had like 3 people at the last service. They're like, yes, I love Christmas. I actually love Christmas too, but maybe not that much. So this is kind of like if you would, a Christmas in August kind of message. So our unlikely Christmas story begins with 3 main characters. So let's look at those. Number 1 is Naomi. We're going to find and meet Naomi. And Naomi is a Jewish woman from Bethlehem who's now widowed and is completely destitute. And she has lost faith in God. In her mind, God has completely abandoned her. And then we're going to find Ruth, who is a Moabite woman, who's also widowed and also destitute, but she turns her life towards God. And then third, we're going to meet Boaz, a man of God that decided to defy his culture and how everyone else was living and live differently. Well, let's start. Ruth chapter 1, verse 1. It says this. It says, in the days when the judges ruled, so there we go. We understand this is the historical context. There was a famine in the land. And a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. Well, let's stop there for just a quick second. So there's a famine during this time of Judges, And so Naomi and her husband, Jewish people, they're like, we've got to go where the food is. They decide to move to Moab. Now, the backstory of Moab is terrible, honestly. The Moabite people actually start from an incestuous relationship with Lot, who's a relative of Abraham. And they, for hundreds of years, become enemies to the people of Israel. But they live on the east side of the Dead Sea. And so they finally, this family, they decide we're going to go to Moab. Then we go at verse 2. It says this. It says, this man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name Naomi. And the names of their two sons were Mahlon and Chilion. And so to set the stage here, as we come to the beginning of Ruth, we find that though this couple had moved, this Jewish family moved, and they were married and had their two sons, when they got there, they stayed in Moab. And as time expanded, as time went on, their two sons married two Moabite women. They didn't go back to Israel. They stayed there. But then as time goes on, we find that Naomi's husband is now dead, and her two sons are now dead, and they had no children. So now Ruth finds herself in the land of Moab with these two daughters-in-law with no grandchildren, and she is destitute. And in fact, she feels like God has completely abandoned her. And she has this conversation with these two daughter-in-laws, and she brings them together. Their name's Orpah and Ruth, and she brings them together and says, look, it's time to just cut your losses. Just go back to your Moabite family, go back to your Moabite gods, and just stay here because God has abandoned me. I'm going back to Bethlehem. And they have this moment where they're crying, they're weeping because they understand that they are at the end of their rope. And so finally, one of them Orpah decides she's going to go. She's going to stay with her family in Moab. But then Ruth, the other one, she decides to stay with Naomi. Now, hear what she says to her. This is one of the most beautiful passages in all of Scripture. This is what it says. Verse 16, it says, but Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. And so while Orpah decided to go back to her Moabite gods and Moabite family, Ruth, she sticks with Naomi. And not only sticks with Naomi, but she decides to follow this same God that Naomi believes has abandoned her. Verse 17, she goes on. She says, where you die, I will die. And there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. So Ruth says, Naomi, I'm going with you. And here Ruth lives up to her name. Her name means friendship. And so the two of them make their way to Bethlehem. Now, you can imagine how dangerous this must have been. Now, you imagine being in Afghanistan right now, if you're a woman, right? Not good times. 3,500 years ago, two women on their own traveling from Moab all the way to Bethlehem by themselves, dangerous. But somehow these two make it there. And when they do, they cause a stir. In fact, I don't have this on the screen, but Ruth chapter 1, verse 19 says that when they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women exclaimed, could this be Naomi? Is this Naomi? Like, is this her? It looks like her. Well, guys, Naomi, her name means pleasant. And she hears these people and she says, don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara instead. Mara in Hebrew means bitter. And she tells the people, verse 21 says, I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. In other words, Naomi says, look, if there's a God, he clearly doesn't care about me. God has abandoned us. I hear these stories about Moses and Abraham and the deliverance of his people and God's promise. But when I look at my life, I feel like God has abandoned me. But guys, 3,500 years from then, now, we still speak her name. We know her name. We know that God did not abandon her. But hey, pretty soon, they're hungry. They're hungry. And so Ruth goes out to harvest, and it's harvest time. Now, one of the great things about the Old Testament, there was actually a law in place. If you were poor, if you didn't have fields of your own, you could actually go in after the harvesters had come, and you could actually glean from that. So if there was any grain that was left or any kind of crops that were left, you could actually go and pick up from what was there. And so they actually were told, don't clear everything. Be sure to leave some for those that are in need. In fact, to this day, that's why if I drop a coin, if I'm fiddling with change and it drops on the ground, I actually will leave it, because I don't know, it's not quite the same, but it's kind of the same principle in my mind. Someone's going to need that quarter. Someone's going to need it. But back then, it was even more important because they needed to eat. And so when Ruth goes out, she happens to find a field and starts going of a man named Boaz. And Boaz eventually comes out and he sees this woman. And he asks one of his guys, hey, who's the new lady, right? She caught his eye. And by this time, word had actually spread about Ruth and what she had done for Naomi. And these were rumors that were spreading, but these weren't bad rumors. These were good rumors. There was great things being said about her. And so Boaz took note, and he went and he talked to her. Chapter 2, verse 11, it says, Boaz replied, I have been told all about what you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with the people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you've done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. See, Boaz realized what she's done is Ruth is a person of integrity. She didn't let Naomi make that journey by herself, destitute. She went with her. And he also recognized that her steps were steps towards the God of Israel, which he mentions right there. Now, it's true, everyone's love story is different. There's lots of ways that each person's found their significant other. Today, people try to find through Bumble or Tinder or matchmakers. I actually have a friend whose wife works for matchmakers, and they live in the New York City area, and she's actually she could be on a subway, and she might see someone that she thinks might be good, and she'll actually go and talk. Can you imagine being on a subway and some stranger comes up to you, starts talking about, hey, would you be interested in meeting someone you've never met by a stranger talking to you on the subway? It's weird, but this happens, and the reason is because there's such a need, or at least there's a felt need, for finding a spouse. You could also try church. That'd be another option, right? You could try that. But listen, integrity attracts integrity. If you want to attract someone of integrity, you've got to be a person of integrity. And both these people, Ruth and Boaz, were people of integrity. We know this, Boaz, being a man of integrity, he goes to the men that work for him in his field and he says, do not bother Ruth. She is in my safekeeping. She's honorable. She's not just a foreigner who's just trying to take advantage of our laws to come in and take what's left. No, this is the real deal. She's a person of integrity. She's someone who's different. So Ruth comes back and she's loaded up with all this food. And Naomi sees this and she's like, what in the world happened? How did this happen? She's like, well, I went to go glean from the fields and I happened to be on the fields of Boaz. And of course, Naomi takes note. I know that name. He's related to my husband who's passed. And here we find the icy heart of Naomi begins to kind of melt a little bit as she sees God work. And so this is good, right? This is great. But Naomi realizes that though their situation's a little bit better, a little bit improved, they're still not out of the woods. They're still not out of the woods. There's still 2 single women in Israel that are destitute. And so Naomi tells Ruth, she says, you, or really she means we, need a covering. You need to appeal to a kinsman redeemer, or what some would call an avenger. They were also called avengers. So what's a kinsman redeemer? What could a kinsman redeemer or avenger do? Well, they could do 4 things. This is someone who could protect an impoverished family member. So this may be someone in your family that has a little bit more resources than maybe you do. It's that one person you call on the phone and be like, hey, let's talk to, so-and-so. Maybe they can help us out. If there was someone in the family that was impoverished, this person could step in. Number 2, they could repurchase lost property. So due to debts or things like that, you could actually lose property, and the kinsman redeemer or avenger could buy that property back. 3, they could redeem relatives sold as slaves. If you didn't pay your debt, it wasn't like you just filed for bankruptcy, guys. You might lose your children to slavery. It's a big deal. And number 4, they could provide an heir for male relatives. They could do that too. But there's problems with their situation, right? Naomi is not an option here because she's old. She's older. She can't bear children anymore. So this avenger would have to marry Ruth. And Ruth's not even Jewish. She's a Moabite and she's a widow. And the former husband, either Naomi's or Ruth's, has some piece of property. So there's some estate that's in question here. So in other words, guys, this is messy, right? This is complicated. And it would be risky and dangerous for them to ask, but Naomi sees no other option. She's like, you need to ask Boaz to marry you. And so Naomi hatches this plan, which is equal to a marriage proposal for Ruth to go to Boaz. So I'm not going to read that passage. Please feel free to read this on your own, but I'll tell you, in our highly sexualized culture, there's a lot of people that try to read stuff into that passage, and I will tell you that if they're trying to, they're just trying to. They're reading something in there that isn't there, because what you're dealing with is two people of integrity. And so suffice it to say, there may be some tension in this moment, but it's not acted out upon, because basically Ruth's proposal could have been taken as a door, as an open door to a sexual encounter. But listen, that didn't happen, because it stressed over and over again the integrity of both of them. But she asks him, will you be my avenger? And let me tell you something, folks, when you find the one, if I could just quote the deep sage Beyonce, if you like it, then you should put a ring on it, okay? If that's the deal, and listen, ladies, I guess that's one way to do it, right? Like, so she's the one who actually did the proposal. Maybe that'll work for you. I don't know. I'm not necessarily saying that you should do that, but anyway, that's what happens here. But Boaz takes this and he says, yes, I will be your kinsman redeemer, but there's a hitch, because there's actually a relative that's closer to you than me. And so I'll tell you what, tomorrow I'm going to deal with this. I'll go and talk to them. And if he refuses, then I will do it. So if we look at chapter 4, verse 5, it says, then Boaz said, so he's talking to this other kinsman redeemer. He says, on the day that you buy the land from Naomi and from Ruth the Moabitess, you acquire the dead man's widow in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. And at this, the kinsman redeemer said, then I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. So we don't really know his reasons. Too complicated, too messy. He doesn't know what he's getting into. He doesn't know this person. But look, we don't even know his name. We just know that he said no. And if I could just pause here for a second, I find it so interesting that there were 2 daughter-in-laws and there were 2 kinsmen redeemers. But in each case, there was only one that followed through with what God was wanting to do. And it makes me think, guys, it's so important for us to not write ourselves out of our own story. Or better yet, to stop erasing God's plot line from our story. Because I promise you, God's story, his version, is so much better than ours. I think, what if Orpah had stayed? What if she had chosen, like Ruth, to follow God? Maybe great things would happen. And here's how I know this. I can actually prove this to be true, because the story of Ruth does not stop here. Because you remember, God gave Israel a promise, and God keeps his promises. So listen, Boaz and Ruth, they get married. The other one denied it, so Boaz steps in. And in time, Boaz and Ruth have a son named Obed. And there's a great little passage, I encourage you to read it, at the end of Ruth, where Naomi is holding Obed. And everyone else is singing the prayer, like, God did not abandon you. God did step in into your situation and redeemed your situation. And there's this beautiful moment where she's holding this child of promise. So, guys, eventually, that's the way of things. Naomi dies. Ruth and Boaz, they eventually die. But their son, Obed, also has a son. And his name is Jesse. And Jesse has a bunch of sons. And around the same time, there's a prophet named Samuel. And God speaks to Samuel and says, look, I'm about to do something new. I'm about to do something amazing that'll have ramifications for thousands of years. And so God said to Samuel, fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem, for I have chosen one of his sons to be king. And so Samuel shows up at Jesse's house and says, hey, I need you to line up all your sons because God has chosen one of them to be king of Israel. And you can imagine Jesse's excited. This is a great day. He doesn't care which one, just pick one, right? So, because now he could be the father of the king of Israel. And so he lays them all out. And the first one definitely looked like a king. But when Samuel went there, God said no. So he went to the next one. God said no. To the third one, God said no. And he went through all the ones that Jesse had there. And Samuel's like, hey, I'm pretty sure I got the right house. Do you have any more sons? And Jesse's like, yeah, I got one more, but man, he's not a king. He's the run of the litter. He's out, with the sheep. He's a shepherd. And Samuel says, I will not sit down until you bring him in. And guys, at that moment, into the pages of history walks King David, the son of Jesse, the son of Obed, the son of Boaz, who married Ruth, the Moabite. And then years later, another prophet, Nathan, as King David was king, Nathan shows up and God speaks this word to King David through Nathan and says this. It says, your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. And so from that day forth, this whole concept of a Messiah came, and it would be that this Messiah would be king forever. And he would come from the lineage of David. And 25 pregnancies later, or as we say in the Bible, begats, right? 25 begats later, Jesus the Messiah was born on Christmas Day. So can we pause here for just a quick second? Imagine if Ruth and Boaz decided to live their life like everyone else in their day and age. I just want to do what I want, when I want, with whomever I want. I realize this could be a whole different topic. This could be a whole different message. But listen, it's important to remember that while God is at work, so is the enemy. And listen to me, pleasure makes a terrible compass. If we make decisions based upon what feels right at the time, we're going to find ourselves out of the story. Our lives should point true north, wherever God is. And this side of the cross, our lives should point towards Jesus. Simply put, if you follow God's will in your life, it could very well impact the future of the world. I know that sounds crazy, but in this case, it is 100% true. Maybe you've heard this saying. I certainly have. It's not my own. It's the most important thing you do may not be something you do. It may be someone you raise. The question is, what legacy will you leave? I tell my kids all the time, I'm like, you are my legacy. Like, I've invested more time, more effort, more conversations, probably more money, more anything in my life than to you too. So don't screw it up, right? It's like, you guys are my legacy. What's Ruth's legacy? She was a Moabite woman who decided that she would no longer be defined by that, but rather follow God, the God of Israel, in faith. Boaz, his legacy was that he was a man obedient to God in a time where his society had lost faith. So guys, 25 pregnancies later, the world's changed. Let's look at the Gospel of Matthew real quick. The beginning of the Matthew, verse 5, it says, Solomon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse. And Jesse, the father of King David. And then let's skip some begots, right? To verse 15. It says, Eliezer, the father of Matthan, and Matthan, the father of Jacob, and Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Messiah. And throughout his life, Jesus would be referred to not only as a Messiah, but as the son of David. Why? Because he was born in the city of David, Bethlehem, Naomi's home. And when Jesus was born, Magi came. From the far east, they came because they knew a king had been born. And not only that, but the reigning king, King Herod, he also believed the king had been born. And so he tried to stamp him out. He killed all these newborn boys to try to stamp out this newborn king, but of course he failed. And if we fast forward to the end, where Jesus is on trial, Pontius Pilate, who was appointed by Tiberius of Rome, he asks Jesus, "Are you a king?" And Jesus looks him dead in the eye and stares down the power of Rome and says, "It is as you say, I am a king. But make no mistake, my kingdom is not of this world. It is a kingdom of the heart, of the conscience, where I reign in the hearts of my followers." So he's not a king like any other, right? Here it is, Jesus, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, who has all power and authority. And instead of using that power to do like other kings do, to make his kingdom more vast and to have more wealth and even more power, he took that power and leveraged it for the powerless. And instead of asking his followers to die for him, like every other king did, he in turn died for his followers. And instead of demanding people submit to his lordship, I love this. This king stands at the door of our heart and knocks. When my grandmother shared Jesus with me, the night I received Christ into my life, she shared this verse with me. I love this verse because it is true for every single one of us. These are the words of Jesus. Revelation 3:20, it says, Jesus says, "Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with him and he with me." Guys, just opening your heart's door to Jesus welcomes in and ushers in this king that was promised so many years ago. And you can yield your heart to this creator king. And listen, when you do, you become a part of this story. You become a part of Ruth and Boaz's story. You become a part of this redemptive story that God started all those years ago. And no longer will you say, "I will do what I want, when I want, with whomever I want." Now it's, "I want to do what you want, when you want it, with whomever you want, because you are now my Lord." Together, as you came in, you should have received communion. And for those of you watching online, this is a great opportunity to grab some cracker and some juice to do this with us. We're going to take communion together. And as we do it together today, I just want to encourage you, to remind you that when you hold that in your hand, you're holding an example of this promise that this King of Kings, he came to die for you. His body was broken for you. That's what that bread represents. And his blood was spilled to usher in a new covenant. Would you open up your heart to him today? Let's pray together. Jesus, thank you so much for the story of Ruth. Thank you so much for Boaz and even Naomi, God. I thank you for how you use these people. In the midst of the situation they were in, they just stepped out in faith and trusted you. And with that, you changed the world. So God, right now, Lord, as we take communion, we were reminded of what happens when we're obedient to you. When we set aside our own will and we focus on you and what you have for us. Jesus, thank you for dying in our place. Thank you for coming back to life 3 days later, conquering sin and death so we might be forgiven, we might have hope and have life. Jesus, we receive you today. We love you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.